You're listening to the Business Communicators.
This week's guest on the Business Communicator is the author of The Prophets of Smoked Meat, A Journey Through Texas Barbecue, the co-author of Whole Hog Barbecue, The Gospel of Carolina Barbecue, and the barbecue editor at Texas Monthly, and most importantly, Thomas Bain's idol. But he has traveled the world sampling smoked meats at over 1,800 barbecue joints, most of which are in Texas. Daniel Vaughn, we are so excited to welcome you to the Business Communicators.
All right. Well, happy to be here talking with y'all.
Well, it's, we wish we could do this in person over barbecue, but, maybe once we get past, the COVID-19 pandemic. But I'm kind of curious about your background. I mean, you're trained as an architect, and now you really have, like, honestly, one of the best jobs, barbecue editor for one of the most high profile, and well-respected magazines in the country. How did you come from, the blog of yours to where you are now?
Yeah, as you said, I went to college at Tulane to become an architect. I did that. I'm still an architect, still a licensed architect. I just don't practice. But yeah, after I moved to Dallas, and that was 20 years ago now, moved to Dallas and really just fell in love with barbecue. Started to write a blog about it. Full Custom Gospel Barbecue was the name of it. And after, I don't know, like 500 or so reviews, Texas Monthly took notice, and I started to do a little bit of freelancing work with them, and then partnered up with them on a barbecue app. And then eventually I got it written into that contract that I'd be part of the tasting team for the 2013 top 50 list. So we do a top 50 barbecue list in Texas every 4 years. So then the next one will be coming up here at the end of this year. We're actually meeting about it next week to really kick that search off. And at that point, I was a full-time architect, but I was also writing a book, my first book, Prophets of Smoked Meat. I was doing research for that. Took a little bit of time off from work. I took 6 weeks off from work, thinking I was going to make a dent in writing this book. It didn't. It was really just all research. Is the only time I spent, or the only thing I did during that time. And so really after that, uh, my interest in being in an office for 8 hours a day was waning. And I reached out to Texas Monthly, and Jake Silverstein was the editor then. And just told him, if you've ever considered hiring somebody full time for barbecue coverage, like, I think I'm ready to make that jump. And a few months later, had a contract proposal, and let's see, it was April 15th was my first day at Texas Monthly back in 2013.
That is awesome. And as we sit here and talk barbecue, so our listeners aren't just in Texas, where we have a defined definition of what barbecue is. I was listening to the Dan Patrick Show and watching the little clip on it, and they showed a clip of burgers being flipped on there. Barbecue and burgers, while they're both meat, I don't necessarily put them in the same. So for all our listeners,
it's funny that you mentioned that right after I just watched the Patreon video from Leroy and Lewis doing their most excellent smoked cheeseburger. So they found a way to, like, turn a burger into barbecue. They smoke it and then grill it afterwards. But yeah, I'm sorry I interrupted you there. I was just thinking about that cheeseburger.
no worries. I've cooked a burger on my personal home smoker as well. But so on the authority, as the person who's in charge of all barbecue across the world, what is your definition of barbecue?
Meat over fire, I think, is too broad of a definition. But I think meat over fire, in which the fire transforms the meat in some way other than simply, getting it hot enough to eat. So as you said, like a burger, I'm never going to put hot dogs on a grill and ask people over for a barbecue, right? I think in Texas, and I think in a lot of other states these days, people are going to be disappointed with that. I will say, however, that since I've taken this job and done all the travel, my definition of barbecue has certainly broadened. I think long ago I would have told you that barbecue is something that needs to be, if it's cooked in an offset smoker, if it's done low and slow, it's got to be large hunks of meat that would otherwise not be good hot and fast. Put all these parameters on it, and after I started eating barbecue all over the state and all over the country, really all over the world now, it became apparent that that definition was not only far too limiting, but historically inaccurate as well. I mean, looking back at Texas barbecue and how it developed, uh, people all over the country were cooking large pieces of meat, mostly whole animals, over direct heat as the primary form of barbecue all over the country before the 1900s. As restaurants started to become popular in the early 1900s, and as restaurants became more popular, we started to codify these different styles of barbecue. And as meat production changed and meat slaughtering and processing practices changed, we started to get those definitions even further down to individual cuts of meat, because now individual cuts of meat were available. But before then, I mean, direct heat cooking, which really isn't practiced in Texas much outside of the hill country, direct heat cooking was the primary way of cooking barbecue. So my old idea that it had to be like an offset smoker or low and slow cooking was way off. And whenever anybody makes that argument to me these days, I have to point out to them that places like Kreitz Market and Lockhart, legendary place, Cooper's and Llano, all of a sudden these big names of Texas barbecue, they're saying aren't barbecue. And I guess my biggest contention is just that if we took all of the things away that people say aren't barbecue, like, we wouldn't be left with any barbecue. So Meathead, who has amazingribs.com, he's got this the saying about a big tent, that barbecue should be a bigger tent. And I think his tent's probably a little bit larger than mine, but like I said, certainly my idea of barbecue has broadened quite a bit, especially since I've taken this job.
I was reading a few of your lists over the years, and some of the establishments that you had on your list, some of them have actually closed. Some they're closed.
Yeah.
And so it comes down to sustainability. One, do you follow up with them to find out exactly, what happened? Are they going to reopen? Or what was the thing that caused them to no longer be in business when they've made this top 50 list and they can't seem to come back from that?
Yeah, and it hurts. We do the top 50, which is certainly seen by most people as the more important of our list. We also do a top 25 best new barbecue joint lists every 4 years, but in between our top 50 lists. And if either of those, if places from either of those lists close, it really does hurt. Not only for the fact that I feel like that sort of designation should do enough to keep you in business. I also feel like for barbecue fans, they refer to those lists. So anytime one gets knocked off and maybe they're led astray to go to that place, hurts a little bit as well. But also for the places that are number 51 and 52, and to know that they didn't make it on the list, are still open and could have had a slot in place of places that closed. But yes, I do follow up with them in every case. And the reason that they close, there's a variety of differences. Variety of reasons, anywhere from, the simple health reasons, maybe the pit master, the owner, has something go wrong. Sometimes the pit master leaves, and maybe an older ownership doesn't really have the energy to carry on. Some places are just poorly managed. The business practices might not always be the strong suit of some great pit masters. So in barbecue, I think especially given the fact that you can really just load a pit up and put a tent out and get selling barbecue, it really only takes one person to do that. Running a one-person operation is difficult, but I think it is one of the few types of food that you can really do. You really can pull off with one person. But generally, if that one person started the business because they're really great at barbecue, they're probably not great at marketing, probably not great at keeping up with the books, all these different things as well. So yeah, there are a variety of reasons, but and the other thing, not just places that have closed, but the places that set themselves up not to make the next list, and that is just the way they react to being in the top 50. And it's hard to tell a barbecue joint, especially one that maybe has been struggling until they make the list, to not just see this as a economic opportunity, but to see it as an opportunity to start to build your longer legacy. And if you see it just as an economic opportunity, you might be tempted to just fill the pits completely full, cook as much barbecue as you possibly can, sell as much barbecue as you possibly can, and not pay as much attention to the quality of it. And if you react that way, you're not going to be selling the same product that you got on the list for, and it's really going to be a detriment to your future, as far as the list goes.
I'm kind of curious too, because we are a business communications podcast, and a large part really of business and the 2020s is social media, and we've seen a lot of barbecue joints blow up, whether it's on Instagram, whether it's through Twitter, Facebook, and even YouTube. I think YouTube has been a huge platform for just spreading, I guess, the knowledge of barbecue, and also, highlighting different businesses. And I think of a place here in Houston, which is Koi Barbecue. It's Viet Tech's barbecue, and they basically do pop-up shops throughout the city and the region, and they're, the visuals that they have, are amazing on Instagram. They have their ramen barbecue. There are, of course, briskets. I'm curious, from your perspective, over the last 10 years, do you think the barbecue game in Texas and throughout the country has been elevated maybe a little bit more because of social media?
Oh, absolutely. In several ways. I think the way that barbecue is presented, I think a lot of barbecue joint owners and pitmasters understand that now the way they present their barbecue to the customer is so important visually, because that is probably going to end up as a photograph that is posted somewhere, and you want to have some control over what those little advertisements for your business are going to be. Take Leonard Botello down at Truth Barbecue in Houston. I and many others have noted the fact that, like, he became this sort of barbecue tray artist, where everything had its place, and everything was arranged in a certain way to be visually stunning. And you take that into account with, like, the fact that now most barbecue is served on trays, not wrapped up in paper, and those trays, I think Instagram itself has sort of brought on this influx of overhead shots. Like, the overhead food shot has become like the sort of generic shot of food, and the way that partners up with a tray of barbecue, it's just seamless. I've given talks to groups of barbecue joint owners with tips on how to present their barbecue better, and, like, one of my most simple ones is, when it comes to go containers, like, buy black to go containers instead of white ones. Like, your food just looks better in them. The photographs from a black styrofoam container look better than one from a white styrofoam container. Just simple tips like that. But then also the fact that all these smaller operations, even like a Koi Barbecue, Houston's got all these pop-ups, JU's Tex-Mex Barbecue, Eddie O's, like, all these places that do these pop-ups, and they understand that if they've got all these people posting these visuals for them to keep people reminded of the fact that they're around, and to follow their social media channels, because you want to be able to get to that next pop-up. And the fact is, if you're running a pop-up and you're not on social media, like, well, you just can't do it. Like, you've got to have that outreach to the public to be able to get people in to the few and far between locations that you're going to be set up. And then also, it makes my job easier and harder. All these people out there who are going around barbecue hunting, it certainly helps in giving me leads of places to go to, seeing all these different people post all these photos and experiences that they have. But it also means that it's almost impossible for me to find a great barbecue joint that nobody's heard of. Like, it almost doesn't exist anymore.
It's interesting you say that, because I know in your 2017 list, a lot of people asked me about the barbecue, and I was like, there's 2 of them on the top 10 that I was like, I hadn't even heard of. Usually I hear some sort of grumbling across the state that you need to go here, you need to go there. and the Tejas chocolate was the one, and I'm like, how'd that one get there? I never even knew that was even in that part of the world.
And it's got chocolate in the name, so that throws people off too. They changed their name from Tejas Chocolate Craftery to Tejas Chocolate and Barbecue, so it's a little more clear now.
A little bit. We're gonna change speed a little bit on this. I read an article about a year ago of your family being in Peru, COVID hitting, and having to rely on your network. Because we're business communicators and business things, networking is everything. I think one of our first guests said it best. Networking isn't part of the thing. Networking is your only thing. Can you kind of tell us a little bit about the story and about how you had to utilize your network to get back home?
Utilizing my network, that might be a bit of a stretch. I thought of it more as sort of a Hail Mary to somebody who I'd had some minimal contacts with, but it ended up working out. Nicholas Gill is a food writer, and he writes he's lived in Peru and lived in the States as well, and writes about Peruvian cuisine and Peruvian foodways, really South American foodways. And long ago, he had written an article in Munchies about Brooklyn barbecue has taken over the world. And when he wrote about it, he was really writing about the aesthetic of Brooklyn barbecue and the fact that he's found this aesthetic of the restaurant and the food in several places around the world. Somebody then at Munchies decided to turn that into a headline that was far more salacious or outlandish, I should say, than what he ever meant by the article. But of course, it's the headline that caught fire. And this photo of barbecue that was, less than impressive, that was attached to it, posted on Twitter 4 years after the article actually came out. So 4 years now in the world of barbecue is like a lifetime. Like the way that barbecue changes in 4 years is pretty dramatic. And so he got thoroughly lambasted all over Twitter. I came to his defense because I realized that this article is 4 years old. I read the article, realized it's not what it said. I interviewed him and posted portions of our interview when all of Twitter was asking me to just pile on along with everyone else. So I guess basically I just wasn't a jerk is what it boiled down to. Several years later, I was in Peru with my family. We were at the top of Machu Picchu on March 15th of 2020. That evening, we were back at our hotel in Cusco, and the president of Peru announced they were going to close the borders in 24 hours or 28 hours from the time that we heard it. We booked a flight to get out of town the next day, showed up at the airport, and there was no flight. Couldn't get in on the flight. We were told we were going to have to just stay in the country for a couple of weeks, and they'd reopen the borders. By the way, the borders still are not fully reopened in Peru. So we were told about 2 weeks we'd have to wait and to just go find a hotel, kindly by the military with guns pushing everyone out of the airport. And so we found a hotel, stayed there for a few days, and in the airport in Cusco, when it looked like maybe this flight from Lima back home wasn't going to happen, I just reached out to Nicholas Gill and said, "Hey, you're the only person I know who has really any connection to Peru. I don't know if you're here right now. I don't even know if you can help. I don't even know if I'll need help. But I figured I'd at least lay some groundwork right now." And he got back to me and just said, just let me know. Let me know if you ever need any help. I've got some contacts, might be able to. And so reached out again once we were stuck in the hotel. And then the day we were supposed to go eat at Central, this great restaurant in Lima. So Virgilio Martinez runs the place. He's a just really well-known chef and like one of Peru's best chefs. And we had reservations at his place, which obviously we couldn't go to. Everything was shut down. Everything but the markets and banks and doctors' offices. So we couldn't go to this restaurant, but I get a call at the hotel from Virgilio, a guy I'd never met, never talked to. We had just watched his Netflix special on our way down to get like pumped up for our meal there. He's like, "So this is Daniel, huh? I hear you need some help getting out of the country." Yes. So couple of like within a day, he had called me back and asked me over the phone for my credit card number so he could charge $1,300 to my credit card. Again, never met, a lot of trust right there. And he said he'd have 4 plane tickets for me. and for me, my wife, and my two kids. And he came through. The next morning, we showed up at the airport, stood outside the gates of the airport for several hours, and finally somebody came. Um, Took all 175 of us inside the airport, and we got on a plane back to Miami, and then flew to DFW from there to get back home. So it was a wild ride for sure. We take a big trip every spring break to see the world, to show my kids the world. And they certainly we got more than we bargained for that trip, but we did get to see Machu Picchu the final day that it was open to the public. It's reopened now, but for quite a few months it was closed to the public, and we at least got to see that and have a experience that was certainly different than any of our other spring break appearances before.
I was just thinking about something. The subject, in terms of what you talk about, in terms of barbecue and, the readers and what they look for, how do you continually keep your audiences engaged around the subject of barbecue? Not just going to a restaurant, not just eating, but what do you think keeps them coming back?
Early on in Texas Monthly, my coverage was mostly about restaurants, and most of that coverage was about food. And you think, as a food writer, of course, that's what you're supposed to write about, right? But I learned that the thing that kept people, especially people outside of the barbecue community, more engaged in the stories, was stories about people. And these days, I really don't write a story about a restaurant and its food if I can't talk to somebody who works there or runs the place or owns the place, and get part of their story about what motivated them for opening up, what motivates them to cook barbecue, what excites them about barbecue. So the stories about people, I think, resonate with certainly people outside of the barbecue community uh, more than just real details about the food. And so that's one of the ways that I've changed my coverage, I think, to keep people engaged. My editor would tell you, recipes, recipes, recipes. You got to get the recipes, because that's the one that brings all the people in. So I do write some recipes. I write more, certainly more now than I ever did before, but I try to find something unique to do rather than, here's how Daniel Vaughn would smoke a brisket. Like you mentioned before, YouTube, they've got 50 different ways to cook a brisket. There's professionals who do it every day who can tell you a lot better than I. But if there's some different cuts out there, some interesting cuts. I've got some lamb in the freezer right now. I'm gonna thaw that out next week and try some lamb shoulder burnt ends, and try the same seasoning on a boneless leg of lamb and smoke it, cook it more to like medium rare and slice it. And so I'm gonna try those two side by side, and if it turns out well, do a recipe. I mean, people make burnt ends out of just about anything these days, but I haven't seen lamb burnt ends anywhere, and I think it's time.
So the three of us will show up at your house at what time? No, I'm kidding. As we're getting close to the end of the time here, and you mentioned that the next list of the Texas top 50, or I like to say the best 50 barbecue joints in the world, because we all know that Texas barbecue is a little bit better. Yes, there's some places that are starting to play with there. It's probably more discussed than coach changes at some of the college universities. What kind of offense is the Dallas Cowboys going to run, or who's going to be quarterback for the Houston Texans? I think for about 6 months, that is the most discussed topic at any water cooler across Texas, pertaining compared to sports. So for our people, are there any barbecue joints that you would recommend us trying now before it becomes a 3-hour line or a 5-hour line or an hour line at some of these places?
Yeah. Is there a city you have in mind, or just anywhere in Texas?
Let's go with the big cities. Like, can you give us one in Dallas, one in Austin, one in Houston,
Okay.
and then maybe a wild card somewhere?
All right. Let's see. Well, so Dallas is my home. I love Dallas, but Fort Worth is kicking our butt, and when it comes to barbecue these days. So I can give you actually a few. I mean, Goldie's Barbecue out in Fort Worth is doing amazing things, and that's Goldie's with two E's. Hurtado Barbecue in Arlington. It's in the mid cities, right in between Dallas and Fort Worth. Amazing stuff. Derek Allen's in Fort Worth. as well. Zavala's Barbecue in Grand Prairie, they've been closed for a couple of months now after the big ice storm, just reopened. And I mean, somebody's gonna be mad because I'm leaving somebody out, because I'm telling you, like, Fort Worth is where it's at. Like, if you want to plan a barbecue trip right now that's gonna hit some unknown places, or at least not known statewide, then Fort Worth is your place right now for sure. Let's see, down in Houston right now, it's an oldie but a goodie, right outside of Houston. Dozier's Barbecue in Katy, in Fulshire, outside of Katy. Um, they're doing great things, and it's been around a really long time. But Jim Buchanan has taken over the pits there, and is mixing, some new barbecue techniques with a lot of the old stuff they've done for a long time. Um, let's see. If I had a map in front of me, I mean, I'll just say right now, I haven't even written an article about it yet. I haven't even interviewed them yet. But the most exciting, like, I got to get back to this place as soon as I possibly can, is Burnt Bean Company Barbecue in Seguin, Texas. Uh, I can't even begin to tell you how good that meal was. I had 2 meals there in one day. I went for breakfast. They do breakfast on Sundays, so I went for breakfast at 9 a.m. Got a brisket huevos rancheros, barbacoa taco, mollejas taco, brisket taco. Uh, Came back for lunch an hour and 45 minutes later. And I mean, it was, hour and 45 minutes later, had nearly the full menu. I didn't do the beef rib because that would have been wasteful. And the sliced brisket, the ribs, the sides, this corn pudding and green beans with tomatoes and bacon. I mean, it was a really stunning meal. So that's certainly a newer place that I think people in San Antonio have heard about, but I don't think a whole lot of people around the state have heard about that one just yet. Let's see, down in Austin. I mean, I've been singing their praises forever, but Leroy and Lewis in Austin is just like, it's hard to beat. Every time they have a special on, it's going to be great. Everything on the base menu is great, and Evan Leroy is the pit master there, and he just keeps his timing just sucks. He just keeps moving from barbecue joint to barbecue joint, like right before I make them a top 50 or anything like that. But they'll be around for this next top 50, and unless something goes horribly wrong there. I mean, they were in our top 25 best new barbecue joint list, but Leroy and Lewis is doing really special things there. But the newest one that I found, and this one's still certainly under the radar just because it is so new, is Distant Relatives in Austin, and it's a new food truck. So Damian Brockway is the pit master there, and it looks like a Texas barbecue menu, and but there's just more to it. He's using a lot of West African spices. He's got a West African spice blend that he's using on every cut of meat. He's decided that Austin has enough brisket. He's doing smoked chuck. He feels like smoked chuck. He thinks it's a better piece of meat, and really just the fact that brisket. There's plenty of great brisket options there, and then his side items are just. He was a chef. He's a trained chef who's worked fine dining, tasting menu restaurants beforehand, and he's taken a lot of that knowledge of building flavors into the sides that he's putting out. And he's also he calls his barbecue modern African American barbecue, and he's doing so much of that obviously through the meats and the seasonings, but I see it most through the sides that he's offering, and doing burn-in black-eyed peas, using the skirt steak or the skirt portion of the pork spare ribs to smoke it and chop it up, put it in the black-eyed peas, smothered cabbage made with a pork stock and carrots, whipped sweet potatoes, whipped brown butter sweet potatoes. He has a pan of brown butter back in the food truck that has his West African spice blend in it, that if you get Texas toast, it's in that butter. He finishes off his smoked chicken quarters in a hot pan of that butter to get it crisp. I stopped in there when it was a month old, and I told myself, like, I got a lot of places to go to today. I'm going to get like one or two sandwiches from here just to get a preview, and I'm moving on. And it smelled so good. The menu looked so good. I was like, all right, 4 meats, 4 sides, put it down, and left that place so excited. And it ruined my day because it was my first stop and I ate way too much. And then I had 5 places after that to eat. So ruined my day in the best of ways. So that's one that's definitely off the radar right now, but I think will become much more well known here before too long.
I think
Is that enough?
yeah, I think maybe you ruined my day a little bit, because now all I can think about is like barbecue, and I'm incredibly hungry, and yeah, I could just see like all of us like salivating as you were describing the sides, and yeah. But anyways, I will definitely have to get some barbecue this weekend. But Daniel, Vaughn, thank you so much for joining us on the Business Communicators podcast. And I know that you're pretty active on social media. So for our listeners out there that maybe they don't follow you, what is the best way for them to connect with you? And I guess what else are you working on that maybe our listeners should keep on the radar?
Well, so I've got Twitter and Instagram. I'm on most of those. I'm on those most of the time. At BBQ Snob is my handle on both of those. I don't spend very much time on Facebook. It's a cesspool. And what I'm working on right now, or you can also email me, dvaughn@texasmonthly.com. I get plenty of emails of places that people are recommending me go travel to and try. I'm always happy to get those recommendations. And really my focus for most of the rest of this year is going to be our top 50. Like I said, we're going to kick that meeting off here real soon with all of our tasters who are going to be going around the state as we compile that list it'll be in our November issue. So it'll be coming out in late October. Usually it's our June issue, but for obvious reasons, we thought pushing the research side and pushing the promotion of road tripping around Texas to, 5-6 months later was prudent. And so that's really what I'm going to be spending most of my time on. So as you see all the write-ups that I have on Texas Monthly from here until now, I'll be writing up all those visits as well. I mean, I'm certainly not going to tell you if they're going to make the top 50 or not, but it might be kind of easy to tell which ones I might favor and which ones I might not. But then any of our tasters could be out there as well and knock them off the list. So they had a terrible meal there, and we don't want to send anybody out for a terrible meal from our top 50 list. So that's going to be a big part of the year upcoming. So it's nice to get back out on the road, fully vaccinated, woohoo, and ready to eat more barbecue.
Yeah, all of us are fully vaccinated as well, so we hope to get on the road, and we can't wait to see that issue when it releases in October, and maybe do a little Business Communicators road trip ourselves. That sounds like it should be in store. But Daniel, Vaughn, thank you so much for joining us on the Business Communicators this week.
All right, well, thank you all. It was good talking with you.
You're listening to the Business Communicators.